Hey friends, if you just watched part one, or if you didn't, I've already been telling a whole story about why I wrote my comics and some weird stuff that's happened. Just as a reminder, I am going to mention medical things, and I do not want advice, and I just wanted to tell everyone to remember, don't give or take medical advice on the internet, and that's just as a general rule because it just doesn't. You go to a doctor for that, and I'm not going to read your medical advice. I'm here to tell a story. It's not about the medical aspect. So, moving on. At the end of the last one, I basically explained that I wrote CNS, and that was like my saving grace in a way, and then what sexual just came out of my brain. At this point, I was doing a lot of treatments. Basically, I was on an oxygen machine at home. It wasn't really like an official thing because the way that everything ended up, I didn't have any methods of proper care per se. But basically, I have Lyme disease that has not gone away. A lot of people call it chronic Lyme disease. Currently, the United States of America calls it post chronic, or it's like post Lyme disease syndrome. They're not acknowledging that it could still be in your system, and it's kind of strange because a lot of other countries do openly acknowledge that chronic Lyme exists and can exist. I'm not really here to debate that. I'm just telling you my experience. Like, I've done more than enough treatments, and there's still evidence of stuff that's there in tests physically. I mean, like, I can't make that up. That's kind of part of the conspiracy part of CNS, but I was so I was bedridden 24/7 on oxygen and in a wheelchair. I could hardly talk anymore. Like, half of me just didn't want to. I'll have to explain that later in the future, but it basically had a lot to do with gender identity. I had turned into a person that was so far from myself that I didn't even know who I was anymore. And that's not in like a soul searchy type of like self, like, what is my purpose? Like, that's in every single movie, like coming of age movie now. No, it was like I had an idea of who I was, and it just totally crashed. Everything crashed, and I was nothing. Like, I felt in my head that I had no gender. I had no thoughts about anything that I could share with anyone. Um, no sexuality, and then like I had hardly any health. It sounds like a video game. Well, I felt like my health was declining to the point where I didn't know if I was going to live, and I've always had this interest in LGBT things, which a lot of you who are LGBT know that basically means you're most likely somewhere in the LGBT spectrum, either in gender or sexuality. So there's that. I just loved reading about like happy gay relationships, as in like people who identified as male with people who identified as male. It was like a combination of like me loving that stuff, and I liked reading like regular stuff with hetero romance as well, but I was dating male identifying people at the time. I was obsessed with this stuff, and it had some weird pang of like sadness, but it was like a deep longing sadness. And I'm like, hey, this is doesn't make sense. Why would anyone want this? Like, why would I desire to have a different body or like a different gender identity? I mean, y'all know the answer to that, but at the time I didn't, and at the time I would never have allowed myself that. Like in the last video mentioned that I have a history of like doubting myself, like to the point where I didn't get treatment for anything until I was like 8 years old because I had severe stomach pain my whole life. But it was so constant and for so long I thought that's how bodies felt to live in. Um, and it's not. Apparently, that's not normal. So that was very clearly what I was also doing in terms of gender. So, I don't remember what I came across, but I kept reading up on trans things, and it was something that captivated my entire mind. I just like could not get away from it. And this story came out of that. What sexual? I like had that revelation that I was mentioning in the doctor's office as I was getting a treatment. Came home, and that night I wrote, I think, 2 chapters at least, like the first 2 chapters of What Sexual, and it just like came out of me. Word explosion, like it was something it wasn't conscious, it was just like flowing out of me basically. That's what I'm trying to say. That had a reason because it was something that felt like really severely attached to me. And so I was like, okay, why don't I just implant myself into this? Like, I don't know if I'm actually trans and that I would like to live as male, if I want to be like identifying as not non-binary or what. So I was like, let's just roll with this and see what happens. Um, by the time I actually made the comic, which wasn't that long after, I felt like it just became more and more of a reality. Like I was watching more and more things about it. By then, I'd been wondering for like almost a year. I wrote it and I started noticing that all of these people felt the exact same way, and they could relate to it on a level where it was like, no, this is exactly what I've experienced, and that was because of gender identity. So I was like, hey, this is crazy, basically. Like, it just, everything started clicking into place. And then my sexuality made more sense. I felt like a real person. Oh, this is important. I forgot to mention that while I was writing and posting CNS, everyone, like a large majority of people, just assumed that I used male pronouns because I never gave away what my gender was. Which, like, if you're okay with your gender, I'm just saying, you probably aren't gonna hide it. So if you have like an online persona that you prefer and you're looking for some hints, like, here's your hint. Yeah, I never corrected anyone and they'd always use male pronouns for me. And I would just like think that that was like the best and most hilarious thing. Like, oh yeah, like this is exactly what I wanted for some reason. Clearly, I just wanted them to get it right, and I didn't know that was right for me because I hadn't thought of that being possible ever before. There's a lot of pieces now to What Sexual and CNS that I'm sure you're all wondering about. And I'll start from What Sexual in the beginning, and then I'll probably have to cut it into another part to explain other bits and pieces from every story. So, when I was younger, I was super, like, always uncomfortable with female anything. And this is why I started telling people recently, like, I'm not afraid of the term feminist, even if I am male, because I've known how it is to live subjected to, like, sexism, but not even identifying with the gender that I'm, like, having to go through that for. And that's just something I can't even describe right now. There was basically like a lot of times when I was in like middle school, like I've always had a history of like, I think, depression, and no one noticed it because I'm so damn good at hiding everything. Like I am a Houdini, which is not good because I would never be opened enough with people about like how I was feeling. That like prevents me from forming proper relationships, prevents me from solving any depression or any emotions that come up, even if it's not long lasting like depression. And it just all around was unhealthy. Of course, there's still reasons that you might have to do that, but like as for PTSD reasons, like I was mentioning before, but still, it's not ideal to hide everything about yourself. I think it's interesting and something worth thinking about when life shows you multiple situations that parallel in that type of way. The stuff I've learned from that, I can apply to different areas of my life, which is something I always want to include in my comics, and that's why I would write about similar experiences to what I've been through. With the depression things, like, I remember who put it in my head that that was an idea. I'm not entirely sure if I had heard before, like, about. Oh, yeah. Just so you know, in this part of the video, I'm going to talk about things that have to do with, like, depression, anxiety, and self-harm. So if that makes you uncomfortable, I'll write what time that will be over, like, right here. And you can skip to it. Um, Stay safe. Don't don't trigger yourself because of me. That'd be something I'd hate. I don't remember who put it in my head that that was a thing that you could do, like in terms of self-harm things, but I remember who suggested it. There was just this kid who's just, I think he was very like cyberbullying of me, and I never really told anyone about it. I don't remember if I told my friends or anything, but that was originally what gave me the idea, and I don't condone any of that. It never works out for me. And the thing with self harm is that once you start something like that, it's literally has an addiction program in your brain. Like, it's the same pattern in your brain as with, like, if you were addicted to alcohol or some type of drug, where you want to return to that as a coping mechanism. And this is what coping mechanisms do when they alter some sort of like hormones or something. So like that type of thing has to do with like adrenaline and things like that, in which that's why some people think that they feel relief from it, but inevitably it causes a lot of extra pain, um, and that's something you'd want to avoid at all costs. So like avoid getting into the habit of it at all costs. But I wanted to include it in my comic because it seemed like that was a reoccurring thing in the LGBT community. Like, it's already been studied that people have a problem with like drugs and like substance abuse in general, in the LGBT community, but it's still taboo in most of society to talk about mental illness and self-harm and like allowing people to not feel well basically in general. Um, so I wanted to bring some like reassurance to people that they weren't alone in experiencing that, and also that they don't have to use that as an outlet. I wanted to show like the bad effects of it, but at the same time it's something that makes me uncomfortable to think about over and over again. So it's not like I'm not gonna continually go back to it, and I never want to glorify it. So my brain is starting to derp, so I think that means it's time to end the second part. I'm gonna add another part, a third part too. Please click subscribe if you haven't already so that you can watch the rest, and leave some comments down below about anything that this reminded you of, if you would like to talk about it, and I'll try to reply to everything I can. Please check the links in the description. Don't be afraid to ever get help, and don't feel bad for it. You deserve it. You're worthy of life and friendship and people who care about you, and I care about you. So I hope you're having a great day. Bye.